Hello, everyone. All right, so like I said, I'm going to give it a couple more minutes to let the stragglers come in because I definitely had some people who RSVP'd who are not yet in the chat. So I definitely want to give them some time. However, I know that it's just been such a dumpster fire of a week that God only knows what people are dealing with or doing right now. So I'm happy to have those of you that could make it and hope that the others will come in soon. So, before we get started, while I'm waiting for them, I'd actually just love to know how you guys are doing. I'm gonna again keep it in the chat box for now, but maybe on a scale of like 1 to 10, with 1 being the worst and 10 being perfect. How is everyone feeling? Feel free to elaborate too. We've got a small group right now, so I can always open it up and make it audio if it stays small. So feel free to type. Let me know how you're doing. There's one more. Hi, Carol. Welcome. We're just waiting for any more stragglers to come in, and then we're going to get started. I was just asking how everyone was doing today because it's been such a weird, awful, strange week for so many people, and I'm just hoping that everyone is safe and as healthy as they can be right now. Anne's doing great. Well, thanks, Anne. Thank you for being here and supporting me and whatnot, Anne. I really appreciate it. It helps to tell the story. It gets a little easier to tell every single time, and you guys are helping me heal, and I hope that I can help you too. All right. Yeah. Breathing. Breathing. Okay. All right. Well, I'm going to get started, and then if I know that one person in here has to log off and log back on, I'll be sure to let you back in, and I may have to let in another straggler or two on the way. But I'm going to get started. So, you're all here for my little 3-week course that I'm doing, and I'm really glad you're here. Thank you for learning with me. This is all completely new to me, doing the online webinars and whatnot. So it's all a little bit of a learning experience, and I appreciate you guys kind of taking the leap with me and taking some time. And so what I've, really thought about over the past couple years is that I try and think of how I managed to get from where I was to where I am now. And one of the biggest questions I keep asking myself is why it took me so long to make that leap. And I always think back to the people who were around me at the time and how, people would offer advice, or some people would say everything from, you can choose not to be depressed, or just focus on the positive, or focus on the good, write a gratitude journal. Like, they would say all these things to me, but it really never sunk in. And it got to a point where it just felt patronizing because I didn't, like, I knew that other people were depressed, of course, but I didn't know there's no way for me to relate to them, right? Like, if you have two people and both people have had their arms cut off, it doesn't make you feel better to know that somebody else has had their arm cut off. Like, you still want your arm back, right? That's kind of how I felt. And so there wasn't a lot of things out there that could actually make me feel like I had any tools to help in the moment, but also things that kind of helped me reframe my life. And in thinking about that now, what I've realized and what I think is going on here is that for a lot of people, the cloud of depression can be so thick and heavy that it's like, even the idea of finding gratitude feels too difficult. It feels too, it's something that you just can't connect to. Like, I could intellectually connect to the fact that I was grateful to have a roof over my head and that I knew I wasn't going to go hungry. I knew that, but that didn't change the fact that emotionally I really didn't really want to be alive, and I was not a happy person. And so there was this dissonance that happened, and I felt like none of the tools were available. It was like they were almost too advanced for me. Like I was not emotionally mature enough, almost like I was a first grader trying to take algebra. I needed someone to speak to me on a first grade level. And that was kind of dark, and it was kind of morbid. And I wasn't looking for transformation. I was just looking to relieve a little bit of the clouds. And so I came up with these kind of weird techniques that really worked for me. And I want to teach you guys them today, because I think that they're atypical ways to reframe our life and to help us look at our big picture in a way that isn't really talked about too much. And so that's what we're going to be doing this week and next week as well. And then the third week, I want to talk about all the people in the industry right now who are pushing for change and the work that's out there that's really brought me a lot of hope, because I've found that not being someone in academia or really having the power, to make legislative change or whatever it is, it's been really helpful to know that there are there are people out there who are, they're deemed the experts because they have letters after their name, even though, we're all experts in our own experience. It's been really helpful for me to know that there are other people fighting this fight. So that's going to be the last week. So today I'm going to work with you guys on the idea of what happened when I calculated the day of my own death, and why that was the first step in helping me recover from depression, and it helped me work through antidepressant withdrawal as well. So I'm going to start with this quote by Lucius Seneca. So Seneca was a philosopher who lived right at the turn of right around the same time Jesus did. He was born in 5 BC, died in 64 BC, I believe, and 65 AD. Sorry, born in 5 BC, died 65 AD, Seneca. Okay, so this is from On the Shortness of Life. It says, "You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your frailty ever enters your head. Of how much time has already gone by, you take no heed. You squander time as if you drew from a full and abundant supply, though all the while that day which you bestow on some person or thing is perhaps your last. You have all the fears of mortals and all the desires of immortals." I'm going to read that one more time, because sometimes I think we need to hear things twice to really start to hear it. This is Seneca. "You live as if you were destined to live forever. No thought of your frailty ever enters your head. Of how much time has already gone by, you take no heed. You squander time as if you drew from a full and abundant supply, though all the while that day which you bestow on some person or thing is perhaps your last. You have all the fears of mortals and all the desires of immortals." So we've all heard the phrase, live each day as if it were your last. But at this point, it's become trite, and I don't think that we're actually really trained to actually operate that way. And so what I found is that for me, it helped me ground myself and ground my emotions if I counted things. And this is something I've done my entire life. I started when I don't know when I started exactly, but my first recollection of it is when I was a kid, and I was in the car carpooling to gymnastics or ballet, and I would count the number of cars that passed us on the highway. And it would get up into the hundreds, and I remember coming out of that feeling like a little wobbly-legged and almost hypnotized, but feeling like I had somehow made order of the world because I counted the cars. And then I'd go to ballet or gymnastics class, and it would be nothing but counting. We would have to do 4 sets of 8 pull-ups or 15 pirouettes or whatever it is. It was always counting in order to bring order. And then when I was working in kitchens, I would count the number of, if I was working with radishes, trying to cut radishes on a mandolin. So they were very slim. I would count the number of radish slices that I got per radish and average them simply to pass the time in my head. And so this was always something that was pretty just ingrained in me. And so I began to think that when I was deep in my own depression, I started to think of the idea of giving myself permission to be depressed. Instead of fighting it, I just said I would give myself permission for it, because I figured I was going to be miserable no matter what. So I may as well stop beating myself up for being miserable and just be miserable. And at the time that this idea kind of occurred to me, I owned my bakery in Manhattan, and our lease for the space was up on May 30th, 2017. And so the idea dropped into my head that I was miserable as I was working at the bakery, so I may as well be miserable for a finite amount of time. And so I gave myself to be miserable every single day. I gave myself permission to be miserable every single day until the bakery's lease was up. I was just going to be miserable. And that was about 1,000 days. And so I started keeping a countdown. And I found that there was something in giving myself permission to be miserable that kind of, one, pulled me out of the allure of it, but also it just took a little bit of the stress away. And so it then occurred to me to just take this idea even farther and say, okay, well, I don't know what sort of misery or how I'm going to be feeling at the end of when the bakery's lease is up. So why not just give myself permission to be miserable for the rest of my life? But that question then led into, well, how am I going to figure out how much longer I'm going to live? And that's when I decided to calculate the day of my own death. Side note, feel free to put any questions or whatnot in the chat box. We'll have a Q&A at the end of this, but if you have any comments or thoughts, feel free to throw them in there. Was this taking place after my withdrawal? This was before I got off all the drugs. This was in 2014 is when I actually started the idea of calculating my own death. I didn't get off the drugs until 2016. So this was a bit of a precursor, and it'll make sense as to why this ties into next week's strategies, which all for me happened after withdrawal. Okay, so how do we calculate the day of our own death? The way I did it is that I went in and took a bunch of life expectancy tests that I sourced from insurance websites, life insurance websites, car insurance websites, just general, there's an article in Time about it. So I would find whatever test they linked to. And I took about a dozen tests. And then I averaged the results of all of those tests. And when I did that, I came up with a number. So according to all these tests, my life expectancy was 83 years, 9 months, and 6 days. So I had this number, but it didn't really mean anything to me at that point because we all kind of think of being, in our golden years is this kind of thing that's never going to happen to us. I know that every year I get a little bit older. When I was in my 20s, 40 seemed really far away. Now that I'm in my 30s, 40 seems a little closer, but 50 still seems really far away. And I think we kind of do that our whole life. So the idea of 83 years, 9 months, and 6 days didn't mean much to me. Where it started to mean something to me was when I figured out how many total days that was, and then found an actual day in time that was the day that all these calculations had said that I was supposed to die. And that date was November 6, 2069. And when I found that date, I scheduled it into my calendar. I put it on my Google Calendar, which I might pull up at some point and share my screen with you guys. So this very specific date, I scheduled it in my calendar, and I made it no more important than a dentist appointment. It just says at 12 p.m. on Wednesday, November 6, 2069, dead. That's it. And After that, I also put it in an app on my phone. And so I have a running countdown now of how many days I have left. And as of today, I have 18,050 days left. So before I get into why I think that this is a really useful exercise, and I think it might be really interesting to have an open discussion about that, I wanted everyone here to take their own life expectancy test, a quick one while we're on the call, so we all have an idea in our head, and I'll run you through the actual way to calculate your day. And so I would like to start with that. I'm going to invite people to share your date and how long you have left. But if you don't feel comfortable, that's totally fine too. So it's going to be up to you. So if you'll just hang tight for 1 second, I'm going to drop into the chat the link I'd like you all to go to, and just take a quick minute-long life expectancy test, and we can all see where we're at. So give me 1 second. My computer crashed earlier, so I lost my tab. So I'm bringing it back up. Okay. All right. So let's see. Okay. So if you guys all want to go to this link, Project Big Life. This is a Canadian website. I happen to be in Canada right now, so Google's been populating with that. But I have a list of more comprehensive life expectancy tests that I'm going to give everyone at the end of our 3 weeks together. And I would really recommend taking some of these more comprehensive ones. You'll see the difference. But this one's quick, and so I didn't want to eat up too much time. So if you all just take a couple minutes, go fill out the little questionnaire. And when you're ready, you can either respond in the chat with a thumbs up if you don't feel comfortable putting your day of death, or not, excuse me, we'll walk you through that. If you don't feel comfortable putting your number in, just give me a thumbs up, or put your number in, whatever you got. There's no shame here. We're all at different parts of our lives, and we've all had very different cards given to us. So we've all got different numbers that are coming up. So I'm just gonna be quiet for about a minute, give everyone a chance. Maybe I'll go take it again. Let's see. Let me know if you have any questions. And we're, of course, just going for a generalization here. So no need to go back through every single meal you've had to make sure you've counted all the potatoes you've eaten. Okay. My number when I take that test is 89 years, which, you know, gives me an extra 6 years based on the test I took a few years ago. So perhaps I drink a lot less. I'm a healthier person. All right. And when you're ready, either just drop me a thumbs up or an okay, or just some indication that you're finishing up your quiz, because I'm talking to digital people right now, so I want to make sure that, like, you're with me. Got one. Good. So just keep that number nearby. Nice healthy people we've got here. Awesome. There's going to be a couple more steps to this. Fantastic. All right, and then I think maybe one of our last people. First I thought. Glad you figured that out, Roman. Okay, all right, so the next thing we're gonna do, everyone's on their computer nearby their phone right now. So I want you to pull up the calculator app, either on your phone or computer. And I want you to multiply the total, your age, or the total number of years you get by 365.25. That 0.25 is important because it's important for two reasons. One, we need to get leap years involved. That's the biggest reason why it's important. So for me, oops, sorry, didn't mean to send that to you privately, Kara. So for me, 89 times 365.25 equals, I can't do the math in my head, 32,507. Okay, so for me, 32,507 days. If you have a notebook or anything nearby, I suggest writing it down. 31,000, yeah, most lives are somehow somewhere around 30,000. That's 30,000 days. That's a typical life. Okay, so 31. It's funny, like I don't know what made it jump from mine. Well, I guess I'm a woman. Technically, women are supposed to live longer, so maybe that's why I have a couple of years on a couple of you guys. Yep, Anne's got the same. All right, so now here's the part where we start to differentiate a little bit. So we've all got the number of days that we have allotted on Earth. Now we need to figure out what that means as far as the day that we are supposed to go. So luckily this gets really easy because Google is super helpful. So all you have to do, I get to live a half day. But well, I mean, yeah, so when you go to schedule your day, Rashawn, make sure you schedule it for the afternoon. Okay, so now in order to find our actual day, we're just going to use Google because Google is super helpful. We're going to input into Google the following. So for me, I'm going to pull mine up. With quotes, we don't need quotes. 32,507, that's my number of days. Days from your birthday. So for me, it's February 1st, 1986. So we're just going to Google. So throw that your regular Google search and see what comes up. So for me, because we weren't too specific, so for me, this says that Friday, February 1st, 2075 is my day. My new day of death, because apparently I've gained a couple years. So now at this point, if you're not totally comfortable sharing your day because of whatever reason, you don't have to, but I just want everyone to have that day because it's important to have the day. It's not just about the number because the numbers are too big for us. It's the day. Okay, Kara, did you put in your number of days? So for you, Kara, 30 days from Wednesday. Oh, there we go. Friday, September 30th, 1972, 2072. There we go. Okay. All right, amazing. Okay. So what I would encourage you guys to do is write this number down. Write this day down. And just keep it off to the side. For me, because of who I am, I needed to go take like literally a dozen of these life expectancy tests and average the results until I felt like secure in my number, because there is quite a range when you take them. I'd say like the highest one that I had, I just took a whole bunch of them recently again to see where my numbers were, and some were projecting like living to 97, and then one was like 83. So there is quite a range, and I find that averaging them is the best. And that there's a couple of the ones I'll send you too that are more comprehensive, that actually break it down into more like years and months, and so the variety is just a little bit more interesting. So, you know, the odds of you dying on your birthday are pretty low. So those will help mix it up a little bit. But still, I want you guys to keep this number handy. So what I did is I then went into my Google Calendar, because Google allows you to schedule out completely indefinitely. And I just put dead on my calendar, and it's scheduled. It's there. I mean, I can even pull it up on my phone. I don't want to share my screen, I don't think, but let's see if we can pull it up. I'll get to it. But when you actually schedule it, what happens is that the power suddenly goes away. At least for me, what happened is the power went away. I went from having this thing that was like, I was never really scared of death. It was something I wanted, but just like the power and the bigness and the confusion of it all suddenly went away, because it literally had the same importance as my dentist appointment that I had tomorrow. And so I think that that reframing started to become really important for me to think about how I was viewing the rest of my life. And so what I did after scheduling it in my calendar, you know, that still was something that was far away. I wasn't going to get a weekly reminder that my day of death was coming, although you could set that up. But what I did is I then downloaded an app on my phone. It's a countdown app, and I have a daily countdown. Like, it allows me to put the date in my phone, and every day that number gets a little smaller. And what this does is it just reminds me that, okay, like, my time here is limited. It would be unreasonable to expect me to live every day like it's my last, because I don't, you know, I'm personally, I'm not there yet. I am not as evolved of a human in order to just really go for the gusto every single day. But making sure that I had some reminder of it really starts to reframe my sense. And the reason is because anything is more doable when you know there's a definite end. Like, this is literally why torture is so effective. It's because people don't know when it'll end. We are amazing at handling what is happening to us in the given moment. And what we're afraid of, what we're always trying to get away from, what we're stopping is future pain. But if you think about, if you stub your toe, the moment you stub your toe and your toe hurts, you're not really upset because your toe hurts right now. You're handling that moment. You're handling the moment of your toe being really hurt. What you're upset about is the fact that your toe might keep hurting. And because you don't know when it's going to end, I mean, a stubbed toe, you can assume it'll end, but there are a lot of worse things in our lives that we don't know when they're going to end. And so by putting this very conscious end date onto our lives, we have a guarantee that it's going to end. And I think that there can be, maybe for some people, a tendency to think that this is morbid, but I found that it's freeing, that it's not actually morbid at all, because what it did for me And this was before I got off all the antidepressants. This was while I was depressed. And while I was depressed, this was key, because suddenly I had this unbelievable awareness and freedom to understand that everything in my life was temporary, the good and the bad. And it wasn't that I didn't know that before. Again, intellectually, I understood it, but things didn't get to me intellectually because there was so much emotional cloud that the intellect had to penetrate in order to really get to my heart. But by taking the power away of my own death and by scheduling it, that hit me emotionally, partially because it was effectively what I wanted. So I was like guaranteed to get what I wanted, and that brought me an odd sense of comfort. But also just in being able to zoom out a little bit, to go from having a very focused view of myself and being all wrapped up in my own swirly darkness, to going big and really spending time thinking about the fact that this was all temporary. And that was great, because when I was in a shit mood and I was super depressed and I did not want to go about my life, I did not want to be alive, I thought to myself, this is temporary. I pulled up the number of days I had to go through. And even though I had a hell of a lot of days to go through, and I knew that it was a long time, I also knew that it would end, and that brought me comfort. But on the flip side, if things weren't at their darkest, or if I was having a moment where I knew that there was something good or beautiful, which still happened to me even when I was depressed. I mean, I had a dog at the time who I think kept me alive probably more than anyone, was because I had to take care of her. But there would be moments where I'd be sitting with her on my couch and I would be so aware of the fact that I didn't get unlimited moments with her, because not only, did she have an end for her life, but that I did too, and that I needed to savor this to the extent that I could. It made those little moments so important for me. But what it didn't do was make me feel more depressed. It did not make me feel like I wanted to just go jump off a bunch of buildings and totally change who I was. It didn't do any of that. It was just this little thing in the back of my head that helped remind me that everything would end, the good and the bad, and so therefore I could stop fighting it a little bit. I could let it be. And then going through antidepressant withdrawal, and now, in recovery from antidepressants, or whatever you want to call it, or even in these like god awful like times that are happening right now, I've found that I come back to this idea and to my number of days so much more frequently than I do when things are rosy, because as the number ticks down, and for me, it gets really interesting if you keep a countdown on your phone, because I'm about to tick down from 18,000 days to 17,000 days. Like, that's a huge tick. I mean, if you've ever had, that much money in your bank account and it ticks down, like when you see that digit drop, you're like not very happy, right? So I've been thinking about this so much lately. And what I'm coming to understand now is that clock that I have, that countdown, it doesn't give a shit whether or not I throw a day away because I'm miserable or because I have an amazing day. It doesn't care one way or another. The only person that puts value on that number getting smaller is me, which means I'm completely in charge of how I want to spend my time. And that turns the mirror on myself in a way that no other exercise has. Because there are days when I want nothing more than to just be in a shit mood, and I choose to be in a shit mood, but I fucking own the fact that I'm in a shit mood, and I don't pretend that it's necessarily anybody else's fault, or that, oh, woe is me. Like, I know that I have chosen to stew in my own crap for that day, and that's how I'm choosing to spend the day. I'm giving it away. And I know that, the philosophers like Seneca would tell me not to do that, but that's part of the learning process, and part of how we learn to have happiness is to understand how to feel those emotions and work through them. But the fact that I can have a shitty day and then decide tomorrow that, I'm gonna do better because because doing better is what's feeling resonant to me, like, it makes me take responsibility. And I think that's how we start healing. And we're not aware that we're starting to heal at the time, but we are. It's changing our thought patterns. It's changing the way we think about our lives. And it's just starting to, brush away all the crap and all the things we've told ourselves for so many years. And that's why I think this is so powerful. Let's see. So before I open this up to some questions, I wanted to read another one of my quotes. Another quote from another Stoic philosopher. This one's from Marcus Aurelius. And I think this speaks to anyone who is kind of struggling with maybe that they don't have that many days to go, or they feel like the idea of death is a very fearful thought. And if this has brought up any of those emotions, I like to think of this quote. So this is Marcus Aurelius. He wrote it in Meditations. It says, "Think of the life you have lived until now as over, and as a dead man, see what's left as a bonus, and live it according to nature. Love the hand that fate deals you and play it as your own, for what could be more fitting?" So I'm going to read that again. "Think of the life you have lived until now as over, and as a dead man, see what's left as a bonus and live it according to nature. Love the hand that fate deals you and play it as your own, for what could be more fitting?" And so before I open this up to some discussions, I just would like to encourage you to think of today as the line drawn in your life. Before you kind of actualize this day of death moment, and after that, everything that comes after is a bonus. Because obviously, I know that I could get hit by a bus tomorrow, or something could happen in 10 years from now, and that the fact that I have arbitrary 18,000 days means nothing. But the idea that I keep it in the back of my head and that I remind myself of this all the time really does help me to live a little bit better, at least to live a little bit more intentionally. And living more intentionally, being more present, like, those are the building blocks to breaking out of these depressive thoughts. And by creating the most morbid exercise in the world, that's how I started to dig my way out. So that's what I wanted to teach you guys today. And now what I would love to do is maybe, I feel like I could maybe unmute people one at a time and see if you have anything you'd like to say or add to the group. We have a small little group here, so I think that would be okay. Let's see. Next time I do this, I'm going to do this more webinar style, so people can digitally raise their hands. But I didn't know about that until I already started this. So anyway, let's see. If you'd like to say something, let's see what the best way to do it. You can message me privately, or you can put something positive, or you can put something in the public chat. I like how Rashawn says, "You're not rejecting or judging yourself for feeling how you feel." No, I've worked a lot on that. I'm not always successful at it. Okay, Rashawn has a question. So Rashawn is one of my favorite humans in the world, and I'm so glad he's here with us because he's just a light in this world. So I am going to unmute you, Rashawn, and you can speak, I think.
Thank you. And you are one of my favorite humans in this world as well. Just to set the record straight. But my question in regards to this is just did this new perspective or mindset at any time give you the mindset or the desire to live in a way that's just screw all consequences, just act in whatever way is desired regardless of what the repercussions may be, no matter how possibly bad they could come out to be,
So for me personally, it did not give me the instinct to go, fuck all and pee into the wind, if you will. That wasn't the reaction. And I think for me, the reason was because I was still me. I was still operating as a depressed person. So I didn't have a lot of motivation to go pee into the wind, and that was one, but also kind of like, I didn't have a short amount of time left. So it wasn't like, I kind of knew that there were still consequences to my actions, and that by throwing caution to the wind, I would still have to face those consequences. However, what it did do was just give me, maybe more of a practical freedom to understand that if I tried to do something new and it didn't work out or whatnot, like, it was temporary, that nothing was a fully committed, nothing was fully committal. So that gave me kind of an unexpected freedom. And I think that's part of the reason why, like, I decided to go on remote year and I decided to travel, was because I had it in my head, okay, this is 365 days. If it doesn't work, I can leave or it'll be over. And thinking this way suddenly made everything feel like it was a project rather than a life sentence. And that to me was where a lot of the power was as well. It's like everything was temporary and I could handle it, knowing that it would one day end. I think, I don't know, there may be some people who kind of throw caution to the wind there, but it doesn't really strike me as something that people really practically do. I kind of think that if you're someone who's going to throw caution to the wind and do stupid shit or reckless shit just because that's who you are, then you probably don't need permission from yourself to go do it. So does that make sense? Probably makes sense. But you also got to check yourself, right? Like, you still have consequences. Okay. What other questions do we have? I can keep talking for sure, but I'd also love to hear from some of you guys. I think what I'm actually going to do, I'm just going to unmute everyone, or ask you to unmute. If you feel like talking, feel free to talk. I mean, we have a few people on the chat, and we're not doing videos, so try not to yell at each other. And I can't hear you.
I'm not speaking.
Oh, it was telling me you were talking. But hi.
Hi. Hello.
Hi. And what are your thoughts on this?
Well, I think that you have to be a very resourceful, self-disciplined person to do this activity. And I'm not sure the population that's going to be interested in doing this activity. And I'm looking at it from a 67-year-old person, not a 30-something-year-old person. So I'm thinking that this is a great skill and a great exercise, but people would have to be very resourceful to do this, I think, and lots of self-discipline, which you have. I know you have. I've watched it over the years. So anyway, lots of kudos. I hope it works. Have you talked to people who it really works for?
I've never really tried to teach anyone what I've done before. I've explained to people what I've done, and I typically get one of two reactions. There are some people who are just, I think, like, just the idea of doing that is just way too morbid for them to comprehend. And then but the other group of people look at me kind of like I've unlocked something in a way. There was actually an article that I was profiled in Fast Company in 2014 because I happened to be talking to a reporter about a completely unrelated subject, something for my job. And I brought up the fact that I had done this, and he kind of scratched his head and he said, wait, tell me more about this. And he ended up writing a little feature on my scheduling my day of death. And the response I got from that was really, really amazing, because there were so many people who said that they had read the article and then done this exercise themselves, and that it had very much reframed their perspective. And so that's kind of how I knew that had some legs.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure reframing your thinking is, this is just one more tool to do that. I'm so glad it's working.
Yeah.
It's working for people. That's great.
Yeah. All I can hope for. It's also interesting too, because this idea of being like very aware of your death and thinking of your own death has been around for a really long time. I've been quoting the Stoic philosophers because they talk about memento mori, which is just being aware of your own death. And some of the Stoic philosophers even carried a coin around in their pockets that said memento mori, that was just supposed to remind them of the fact that they were going to die, so don't get to, you're mere mortals, was the reminder. And then there's a quote in Shakespeare as well where one of Shakespeare's characters says, every third thought is about my own death. And the idea is just that it helps ground us and helps us realize that sometimes things are not as big and scary as perhaps we make them out to be, and all the damage that we do in our own heads. And I think it's just a really sobering way to help people. So I would love to hear from Roman or Kara or anyone else who has any questions. Let's see, you're all muted, Anne. Mute you again, Anne. Roman's thinking. So next week when we talk, I'm going to come back to this idea, because it's just like, it's the quantification for me. It's so much of this is like, how do we dig through the emotion? How do we cut through emotion, which is so illogical? And it's why we get so wrapped up in our own selves, is because we can't 2 + 2 our emotion. It doesn't work. And it's why you can't argue with someone who's upset. Like, it doesn't matter who's right or wrong. You're never going to get there. And so when I was going through antidepressant withdrawal, my emotions were like on such a bizarre, they were going so crazy that there was no way for me to find any sort of rationality or logic in my own emotions. And so I tried to start developing ways in order to bring numbers, to bring grounding back to it. And this will all tie in there. Kara, if you can't figure out your settings, feel free to just type something in the chat box. So yeah, anyway, for me, so much of about it is trying to say, like, okay, I've become self-aware enough to know that I'm a hot mess, but how do I fix the hot messness? It started with this, and then there's the 51%, which is the other thing that I developed for it. And now I feel like I've become aware enough that I can almost pinpoint the problems sort of before they start, or I'm at least able to step back enough from them and say, just get curious. And by getting curious, again, it pulls us out of our own story and our own thought patterns, and asks us to look at ourselves as if we're, like our best friend, and see how they're doing. See if we can see it from somebody else's perspective. Okay, Roman is asking me, can I describe my relationship with food pre, during, and post antidepressant withdrawal? Because food is health and wellness. Yeah, sure. So Roman is a chef as well. And so, oh God, I would say that my relationship with food is complicated, in the sense that it has never really been about food. It took a long time for me to come around to the idea that food was about nourishment and making sure my body worked in the way like you put gas in a car. It was always much more wrapped up with emotion, or I had associated it with childhood bullshit or whatever it was. So so I was a kid. I was a very serious ballet dancer, and so as a kid, I had an awareness pretty early on about the idea of being thin and how that's what I wanted to be. I didn't necessarily know that it's not like anyone told me that being fat is bad. That wasn't what I was told, but I was still, because I was a dancer and all I saw was the 1970s Balanchine bodies that I loved, who were rail thin and very sick. I wanted that in some way too. So I always kind of had this stuck in my head, combined with, then after my father died and my mom hated cooking and my father never really wanted to like sit down with the family to eat. So we kind of eat a lot on our own. And so food was more of like, for me personally, food was not something I used as nourishment. I used it as like, I needed to help me achieve a certain look for the dancing I was doing. But then I also realized really early on that food is a great way to make friends. And I was not a particularly cool kid. I was big square. And so when I brought people cookies, they liked me better. And that is the first connection I started to make of like, oh, maybe I should work with food for my life because I like the positive feedback I get from when I bring people cookies. And so that continued on right alongside the eating disorders that were developing as my dad died and I was put on all these drugs. And, like in hindsight, this is no mystery. I was going through immense trauma and I was medicated and food was the only thing I could control. And I also just like literally wanted to disappear. So don't eat. Like it's no surprise when I look back on it. The fact that it kind of took so long to work out is a little bit more concerning. But so going up to antidepressant withdrawal, what happened is, I would say like, as I got older and I also started lifting weights, I started doing competitive CrossFit, I started to view food more as fuel because I saw how I needed it to make my body work better. And I think that just in some maturity, and I wasn't dancing anymore, also helped me have a little bit of a different relationship with it. And then when I went into antidepressant withdrawal, I don't actually remember my relationship with food changing too much, partially because I was prepping for Chopped at the time, so I was still cooking a lot, and I was working at the bakery too, so I was cooking constantly. But what I noticed was that my tastes changed, and so things that I had disliked my whole life, like the best example is ginger. I hated ginger. Ginger anything. I didn't like gingerbread. God forbid you put ginger near my sushi. I hated ginger tea. I loathed ginger. And then I got off the antidepressants and I just wanted ginger all the time, and now I love it. It was quite literally a before and after change. I don't know why. There are a few other things that happened with that too. I hated avocados for most of my life. Don't know why. And then they became a thing that I started to really eat and enjoy and crave. And towards the end of my antidepressant use and well into antidepressant withdrawal. My tolerance for booze went down. I felt like my body just felt like it became way more acidic, and so it didn't want acidic things as much. Like I could still drink, however much I wanted, but my stomach would be really upset in a way that it never was when I was on the drugs. I also had to cut out coffee, because I had drank coffee my whole life, and then it was like coffee started to wage war on my insides. And so that has all just been something I've dealt with as time has gone by, to figure out what my body wants now and what it likes and what it doesn't. And the bottom line is it's just a lot more persnickety, and I eat much plainer now. I just want things plain. Okay. Kara, let's see. How make sure this is fixed for next week. The topic had me wondering what this is all about. Yeah, no, I know that it's a bit of a weird thing, and not everybody likes it, and that's totally okay. And I think it's just something to think about. And if all you take from it is that things are more temporary, then I think that's what it's supposed to be for. So next week's not as morbid, guys, I promise. Next week is much more, it's a little bit more day-to-day actionable, and not as morbid. So thank you so much for coming in, Kara, and then Rashawn. since I went on antidepressants around my dad's death, how did you process that post-withdrawal? A lot of crying and anger. So one of the reasons why I've kind of felt so, I mean, I guess been on my little crusade against the antidepressants is because I think all I really did was take a trauma when I was 15 and just move it to when I got off the drugs. I never really totally processed the trauma at the time I did, because the drugs wouldn't let me, and if you had asked me at the time, I probably would have said great. But there's no forethought in that. And by the time I was in my 30s and processing his death, I felt, not only was I feeling all the emotions that I didn't feel when I was 15. I mean, I literally felt them. I went from basically, not having done all that much crying in 15 years or feeling all that much to feeling everything. Like, it wasn't like I just, like, it was as if it had just happened. I mean, the grief was absolutely crushing. But then it was mixed with all this anger, because I also had 15 years of other crap that had happened. I had lost multiple people who were close to me while I was on drugs, that I also had to process that. I had the grief of, leaving because I was about to travel. And it just compounded. And I think that the real risk here is that we move our suffering to a later date, assuming that it will be easier. But that's like saying, oh, well, I'll retire when I'm 50 and then I'll travel the world. Like, there's no guarantees. You don't maybe get to travel the world when you're 50. You have today, you have this moment, and that's all you have. And the fact that we like to give away our time and give away this unrenewable resource, either to our own anxiety or to other people or to careers we don't want or whatever it is, it's what kind of keeps us in this constant loop of hell, because we never get a chance to just process it and fix it. And so grief is not something that gets fixed right away, but I do believe it's something that is much better weathered when it is allowed to process naturally, as opposed to kind of being on hold. And that lines up with some of the work of a bunch of psychiatrists and psychologists and neuroscientists I've been working with too, who say that, like, the risk is that we put people on these drugs in the middle of a trauma, and then they stop processing it, and it comes out later. One researcher, a grief, said to me that suffering waits for us. So that it waited for me. I don't know a single person who it has not waited for. And because of that, I think we would do a lot better if we can just allow the suffering to happen when it's happening. I mean, right now is a perfect example. There are so many people who are in pain or who are suffering over one thing or another that's all tits up in our world, and we need to let them process that now while it's happening. So when this starts to end and it's over, we can transition into the next part. But, like, how terrible would it be if all the anxiety created by COVID or whatever it is still a part of your life 5 or 6 or 10 years from now? Because we pushed it down. Now is the time to deal with it, because now is the time that it's happening, and now is the time where there's support. So that's my feeling on that. There's actually another quote from Seneca: "It's better to conquer grief than to deceive it." I wrote that down this morning as I was going through my philosophy work, and it happens to be particularly relevant now. So anyway, thank you all so much for spending an hour with me. We're about at the end of time. So as I said, at the end of this 3 weeks, I'm going to send you all a big PDF that's going to have everything we've talked about for all 3 weeks in one place. I wanted to keep it in just one email, so I'm not bombarding you with emails all the time. I'll also probably put a little survey in there too, so I can figure out how to get better and reach more people. So thank you so much, everyone. And you've all got my email if you have any questions, and I just appreciate you taking the time to be with me. All right, have a good Sunday. Bye.